So we've got a great webinar for you today. How long is this going to take? So kind of helping students navigate each step of their HSE journey, which can be kind of a long time for some. So kind of helping them understand what those different measuring points along the way, those key points along the way is going to be helpful in keeping them motivated. Kara, if you want to go on. So we're going to ask you, for those of you who have been to our webinars before, you know this, but those of you who haven't, we're going to ask you to use the chat to introduce yourself, share links and resources with the group. It's where Danielle is going to be posting links throughout the webinar for you guys to investigate. And if you want to ask questions of the group, you can post those in the chat. We are going to ask that if you have questions for Kara, please post those using the Q&A button because that helps us track the questions and make sure everybody's questions get answered. We are recording, so after the webinar, you will get a follow-up email. Danielle's very efficient with this, so it'll come out in the next day or two. It'll have a link to the webinar recording. It'll have the slideshow that Kara's using, so she'll share that with you. There'll be a summary sheet of Kara's kind of key points. There'll be a transcript of the chat, a Q&A, a certificate, and information about scholarships and individual memberships. And we'll talk a little bit more about those later. Separate from that email, you're going to get another email with registration links to coaching sessions. And you'll see the dates and times there. They'll also be in the email. They'll be in the slideshow. And Kara, if you'll advance, we'll talk a little bit about what those small group coaching sessions are. Oh, did we go to the resources first? There we go. So small group coaching sessions. So what these are is just kind of recognizing that a lot of times when we attend a webinar, we hear a great idea. It might be 2, 3, 4 weeks before we actually try to implement that idea. And by that time, maybe it's not as fresh in our mind. Maybe the way the presenter described it, when we start trying to do it, we run into some barriers implementing it. Maybe our students are not as similar to the students as the from the webinar presenter that we might think of. So this is just an opportunity to, once you are trying to think about implementing the strategies, you have some questions, there's an opportunity to sign up and get a chance to talk to Kara and have her help you through those barriers. So there's, I think, 6 different dates, up to 12 participants. So let's say it's me, Danielle, and Lauren. We all sign up for Kara's first coaching session. We go in, Kara, we ask Todd, what's your question? And I say, well, I've been working out with students on setting some timeline goals, and I think our timelines might be, let's say, a little too quick. I think we're too aggressive. How do I convince students to slow down? Kara would give me some great advice. I might get some great advice from Lauren and Danielle as well, and then we would move on to the next person. So it's just an opportunity to get very specific questions that you have answered, hear from other people that are there in the coaching session with you, share ideas. I might have some advice for Danielle as well with the question that she asked. So that's the coaching sessions. Encourage you to make use of those. It's an opportunity we don't often have. And then we mentioned the memberships and the scholarships. So we have 60 $1,000 scholarships to give away, an opportunity for you to order instructional materials or kind of teacher support materials from New Readers Press. So just kind of recognizing that a lot of times as teachers, we come in, the program already has materials that they've selected that they're using. Maybe they are, weak in some areas. Maybe Kara's talking about something and recommends a material that you haven't tried before. So this is an opportunity to kind of go through that New Readers Press catalog and order some materials that you think might be able to help you in your instruction. There's a link down at the bottom that'll be on the slideshow that we send out. and you can click on that and apply for the scholarship for materials. The other thing, the membership information, everybody that participates in this Teacher Training Plus project can sign up for a free individual membership for pro literacy. And the benefits of that are most of you are familiar with our Pro Literacy Education Network. It's our resource hub. And while a lot of those resources on there are free and available to everybody, there are some that are only free to members or only available to members. So sign up for that free individual membership and kind of unlock a lot of those additional resources. And with that, I think that's all the introductory pieces I have. So Kara, I will turn things over to you.
Thank you so much, Todd. And I'm so happy to be with everybody here today. I wanted just to extend a thank you to Danielle and Lauren, the whole pro literacy team, as well as then Dollar General. I'm happy for this to be my second year part of this project, and I'm so happy to be here with all of you today. So for those of you who have attended one of my webinars before, perhaps last year, welcome back. And if this is your first time attending one of my webinars, I'm so happy that you're here with us. Those of you who have been on one of these webinars before know that I love being able to share information with my fellow adult educators. This is really an opportunity for us to have a conversation. What I like to tell attendees, though, is this is just the beginning of that conversation. I want to make sure that we definitely get an opportunity to meet during those coaching sessions. I love the coaching sessions because that really is an opportunity for us to have either a one-on-one conversation or a small group conversation and continue what we're talking about here today. We only have so much time here, so please, if you get the opportunity to sign up for a coaching session, I'd love to see you all. Okay, here's my bio. My name is Krawiec. I have been in the adult education world for about 7 years, but I also have teaching experience beyond that. And I am just so happy to be able to talk to you about how we can help our adult students reach their HSE goals. Okay, so today, I like to let everybody know that I try to title all of my presentations with some of the most common questions I get from students. And of course, then one of the most common questions I get with students as they start in our program is, how long is this going to take? How many of you have heard that question before? Especially when we talk about earning an HSE, that timeline may look a little different. So we want to talk to students about, how long is this going to take? And of course, then what I like to always encourage my students is that I remind them this is not just a deadline. We don't want to think about, okay, HSE, I have to get it this deadline. Let's think about this as a timeline, because timelines are able to be adjusted and are able to be revised. So we want to think about this as a journey, and definitely our students are in the driver's seat of this journey, and we are here to help them along the way. So today we're going to talk about a couple of different things. We're going to talk about setting goals with our HSE learners. So how do we actually come up with those goals? How do we make them work for them? Then we want to talk about, of course, providing the support and community needed to take them from one step to the other. Then we want to talk about revisiting and revising goals, because of course, as we go along this journey, there may be some bumps in the road, some things that we might have to rethink, rework. So we want to make sure we talk to our students about, how do we do that? How do we make these adjustments as we go along? And then of course, get to celebrate that success. I always want to celebrate our success with our students, because ultimately every time we reach one of these goals, it's cause for celebration. So I'd just like to start our session today by asking all of you, how does your program approach having students study for their HSE exam? Do you encourage students to study one subject at a time, or do you have them study for all of them at once? So please, if you don't mind putting this into the chat, I love to have participants let me know what's going on. I'm always curious to hear how other programs approach this. So please put it in the chat. And then also, what do you find most helpful about that approach, or what that you don't find helpful? So please put that in the chat for me right now. So how do you talk to your students about studying for the HSE exam? Is it one subject at a time, or is it all at once? All right, so I see one subject at a time. It varies, one subject at a time, one or two subjects. Yeah, start with the subject of their choice. Good, one subject. Depends on the student, yes. Yeah, I let the student decide. Yeah, variety. Okay, subject usually social studies first. Interesting, I love that. Okay, yeah. Study all of them because reading applies. Yes, reading applies to all of the subjects. Yeah, I just love to get to read and see how everybody else is approaching this. Because they can't focus, but they can focus on their weakest subject first. Yes, thank you, Bill. Thank you all so much for sharing that. I really appreciate getting to kind of hear how others are approaching it. And it's also great to kind of hear that so many people are saying, it depends on the student. It varies on the student. I like to ask them because that is so crucial, of course. Yes. So just to let everybody kind of know, in my program then, we often start students with both reading and math. Typically that's because when we talk to students about the GED or the high set, those are the two pillars of that test. For the GED, language arts and math are the two literal longest sections of the test, right? Both in terms of content, but also then in terms of just like length, right? That language arts test is so long. So we want to be able to help set up our students with, these are the two sections of the test that may take the most amount of time to prepare for. But also, as others have mentioned, reading is kind of at the core of all of that, right? So we want to make sure that we're able to help build those skills for all sections of the test. So even though we typically encourage our students to maybe start with these two subjects, always the first day of class, I tell my students, it's up to you. If you would prefer to focus on social studies first, if you'd prefer to focus on science first, we can absolutely do that. And often then what I find too is our students do want to then narrow their focus to one subject at a time, because it does help them really pinpoint then the areas that they need to cover and set up some of these benchmark goals that we're going to talk about. And then of course, really see that success. The other thing that I always like to kind of encourage students to do, which I saw other people say as well, is focus on the subject that's going to be the most challenging. This is so helpful because if students focus on that challenge subject first, then once they pass it, number one, it is just such a good feeling, but also at the same time, it builds that momentum. And then hopefully those other subjects will feel so much more attainable and be able to come so much faster. Of course, the important thing to stress is regardless of how you approach it or regardless of how your program approaches it, it's always good to have that conversation with students. Each student is going to have an individual need and an individual approach. So we want to acknowledge that. We want to help our students with whatever way they're going to find most helpful. Yeah. Oh, thank you guys so much. And thank you for participating. Yeah, I'm trying to keep an eye on the chat as well. So please, anything you'd like to add to that, I'd always love to hear it. Also, as Todd mentioned earlier, the Q&A, if you have questions for later, please add some of those questions to the Q&A. All right, keep going. I know that there have been a couple of other strands that have already covered SMART goals. I'm actually going to ask Danielle to put the links to those webinars in the chat. There actually was a whole webinar entirely dedicated to SMART goals. So I want to make sure that you guys have access to those. They're really wonderful and I encourage you to check them out. So I'd just like to very briefly though, talk about SMART goals and how they apply to our HSE learners. So of course, when we talk about SMART goals, we talk about specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely. We want to think about all of those components in order to create a goal that our students will be able to achieve. And of course, then in a realistic time frame. For HSE learners, I find it most helpful to stress the measurable and timely components, because typically when a student starts in our program, if they are an HSE learner, their goal might be, I want to get my GED. I want to get my high set. And that's a pretty broad goal, right? That's the ultimate, excuse me, goal. However, I always ask our students to think about why. Why do they want that achievement? What are they looking to do then once they have that? Because even though so many of our students, and for instance, in my program, about 90% of our students are coming to us to earn their HSE. But what makes them so unique and so different is all of those individual reasons why. What is bringing them exactly to our program and to this goal of getting their HSE? Then when we think about kind of the broadness of that, let's achieve your HSE, it helps to really stress the importance of measuring that success through smaller benchmark and progress goals. Because again, I want my GED is so broad, but we have so many steps along the way to get to that ultimate goal. So we want to be able to measure, how are we getting there? What do we need to do to get there? And similarly, as the title of my presentation suggests, when our students enter our program, often it's that question of how long is this going to take? So we want it to be timely. And this means, of course, then making sure that that goal and that timeline is realistic and achievable. So we want to make sure that when we talk to students about this, again, stress, it's a timeline, not a deadline. So we want to create a timeline that makes sense, that's going to work for the individual, and make sure then that we keep working towards that continually. All right. Do we have any questions first before I kind of jump into this next slide? How are we doing? Has anybody used SMART goals in their classroom already? And if so, please share what experiences you've had with them. Oh, actually, I'm going to go back to that slide. Forgive me. I forgot to mention this. Hello. Okay. Sorry, guys. I've really been very excited about clicking through all my slides, so I'm moving right ahead. I wanted to point out this example on the screen. This is the SMART goal sheet that we give to new students as they enter into our program. What I really love about this SMART goal sheet is it provides an initial conversation with our students. This is the opportunity for me to really ask them, what are we going to achieve? Let's work this out together. But also, when a student completes their SMART goals, it goes into their student folders. When it goes into their student folders, this is something they have access to every single day. Students can use it as a way to reflect, look back on their SMART goals, remind themselves of what they're working towards, but also the opportunity to revise some of them, to think about, okay, are these still applicable? Where am I in my goal or in my journey? It's also wonderful. I recently actually just had a new student start with our program. She's been with us for about 3 weeks, and she comes in every single day, sits down, and the first thing she does is read over her SMART goals. This is something that each morning then she uses as a way to inspire her achievement and to tell herself, I can do this. It's really wonderful. She actually has told me that she lives very close to the school, and she said, this is the way that I tell myself there's no excuses for me not to be here. And she's actually been able to come to every single class since she started with us about 3 weeks ago, which is fantastic. The other thing I want to point out that I really like about this SMART goal sheet is that we ask students to fill out the My Strengths and the My Challenges component. What I really enjoy about the My Strengths is that it gives students an opportunity to think about what strengths do they have, perhaps even outside the classroom, that can be applied then to an academic context. In one of the presentations I gave last year, I talked a lot about how we can help students examine non-academic topics through academic eyes. That's something that we can always encourage students to do, and it's same with thinking about their strengths. Let's say, for instance, a student writes that one of their strengths is being a really good listener and is really good at then helping family members when they listen to what's going on in their lives. A student may say, I don't really understand how that could be a strength in the classroom. However, if you think about it and kind of talk to the student about it, well, sitting down next to a tutor and having that conversation and making sure then that you're really listening and really absorbing, especially if that's a way that you take in different information in one of your learning styles, can be a great asset then and a great strength within the classroom. Or for instance, if the student is the person who's the go-to cake baker for all their family members' birthdays. That may be something that, you know, they can say, I love to bake. I love to share that with others. And I can get really creative with the cakes that I make. You can kind of talk about how looking at that recipe, making sure that you're measuring, making sure that probably dealing with some fractions or converting those numbers so that you can feed an entire family or however many numbers of people. That's so crucial. That's a skill that we can apply then to the classroom. And also then, of course, the creativity, right, that comes with being somebody who enjoys being in the kitchen and enjoys creating things for others. All of those strengths then we can apply to the classroom setting as well. All right. How are we doing? Any questions? All right. Now I'm ready. All right. So one of the best ways to measure student success is to set those benchmark goals. So this helps with that idea of, again, creating that timeline and seeing different steps that we need to take in order to reach that ultimate goal. It may be that a student thinks, okay, my end goal is to get my GED, so taking a practice test would be a great benchmark goal. I'm going to encourage that student to go even further with it. I'm going to say, okay, if you'd like to take a practice test, you know, in 3 months, let's think about what's the first step that we have to do. Okay, the first step might even be just completing the STEC-FON fiction materials that we have and making sure that that unit is completely gone over and that you understand it before, of course, we get to a practice test. Because what we want to really make sure our students understand is that we want those goals to be as specific as possible, those benchmark goals, because the smaller those goals are, the more achievable they are. The more we can start to say, okay, look at what you've accomplished. I kind of always think of those stacking dolls. So it's a goal within a goal within a goal. We want it to be as specific as possible so that we can keep showing how that progress is continual. And then, of course, every time we reach a benchmark, that's a reason to celebrate, which is a wonderful thing that we can keep doing every time our student reaches one of those benchmark goals. Of course, then another thing that we can do to kind of help our students see their progress as they're moving through our program is to use reassessments. Yes, I said it. I said reassessments. I don't know about all of you, but I have had some students who hard avoid reassessments. I understand that TABE is so time consuming. However, what we want to think about then is how can we change that narrative? How can we turn reassessments into something positive, into something that our students look forward to? So recently I have tried talking to my students about how this is an opportunity for growth, and this is an opportunity for us to really dig into what they have already achieved and then what we need to moving forward. I've changed the conversation surrounding those reassessments and using them less as a, okay, we've reached so many hours of instruction, this is the time to check in. Instead, using them as that, let's really see how close are you? What have you been working on that we can really take a look at and make sure that you are fully understanding. Those reassessments also provide an opportunity to try out those test-taking skills that we've been working on in class. It's a way to apply some of what you've been learning within the classroom to a test-taking context without the pressure of it being a practice test or without the pressure of it being the official GED test. Oh, thank you, Gail, for that question. Yeah, does anyone do anything different, shorter than TABE? I know CASAS is also out there. I don't know about how long it is, though. So if anybody has any suggestions, please, I'd be happy to hear it because, yes, TABE is so long. But Gail, one thing I have done as well that can't help is breaking up those reassessments to just give the student, you know, just reading when they're working towards their language arts section of the test, or just math. That way we can kind of shorten that just time that you have to take in taking a reassessment. But the other thing that I really like about reassessments is it is a tangible way to show the student these are the gains that you're making, and this is also what we have to look at in order to improve. It's very helpful when students do make gains, right? Because then that encourages that self-confidence, that self-efficacy. But then if a student does not make those gains, I know how difficult those conversations can be. And I want to talk a little bit then later about kind of having those difficult conversations. But the main thing to stress is that those are an opportunity for us to really say, okay, let's take a look at this. What can we do differently next time in order to improve? And again, it's kind of thinking about the way we talk about if a student doesn't make the gains that they'd like, if a student doesn't succeed in the way that they wanted to. It's all about the way that we're able to help them see that this could be an opportunity for growth. And so one of the things I always like to talk to my tutors about is making sure we use what's called the criticism sandwich. So it's starting with something positive. Always start with something encouraging, even if it's small. If a student perhaps in one subject makes, a couple of a points difference and goes up just a little bit, we could talk about, hey, look at that. Look at what you've been working on. And then of course, they're not making gains in other areas. You can say, okay, so now we really have to look at those areas that we need to spend some more time with. And then of course, at the very end, bring it back and make sure it's something positive with an action plan. We want to have something to look forward to, something tangible that a student can take away from that conversation to say, okay, here's what I've done well, here's what I need to improve on, and here's how we're going to improve on it. Yeah. All right, how are we doing? I see some people have added in the chat. Casas, all right. And yes, thank you, Bill. They hopefully for TABE 13-14, it will get a little bit shorter. We shall see. Excellent. So especially now that we're talking about how do we keep students motivated when they're not making the gains that they'd like to, I wanted to talk a little bit about, yes, how do we overcome these obstacles and pitfalls? And that is, of course, thinking about what is driving our students. According to self-determination theory, there are 3 crucial needs that drive all growth and learning: competence, autonomy, and relatedness. So self-determination theory started because it was looking at how extrinsic motivators can turn into intrinsic motivation. And what they found was that extrinsic motivation, for instance, like monetary gain or incentives or kind of these short-term prizes, do not actually help in transforming into that intrinsic motivation, which is what moves people to do something for themselves, to have the initiative to say, yes, this is coming from within, something I want for myself. However, what they did find is that 2 ways you can use extrinsic motivation to turn into intrinsic motivation is use things like choice and positive feedback. So of course, when we're talking to adult students, we want to make sure we stress that everything is their choice. As I've been saying throughout this presentation, is that this HSE is a journey. It's not just one step, it's a series of steps. And each one of those steps has a choice attached to it. And of course, our students are at the helm of that. We want to make sure that we show them you have the choice. You are allowed to decide which subject you focus on, which one you might want to approach first, or how you'd like to go about this. The other thing then too is always that positive feedback. So as I mentioned before, even with reassessments or when we're trying to help our students understand why they may not be making the gains they'd like to, if we're able to give them some positive feedback with that, to talk to them about ways that we're seeing growth, perhaps even outside of just that testing environment, that's a way then to help encourage them. And also, of course, it feeds into that idea of we need to feel competent, right? And this autonomy over our own learning in order to continue forward. Even though autonomy and competence are so important, I'd argue that the most important component is relatedness. So in self-determination theory, it talks about this idea of relatedness as well. So that feeling of belonging and connection. This is where we can help our students by really building a strong learning community within the classroom. And I'll talk about that a little bit more on the next slide. But Helping build that strong classroom can also then, of course, help with this idea of building self-efficacy through vicarious experiences. So being able to see others achieve what we're trying to achieve can really be a motivating factor and can help us then actually imagine our success. So when our students come into our program, this is a picture of our grad wall. Every day when they enter into the program, they have to walk past this wall. It's my favorite wall in our building because it's such a wonderful inspiration. And it's really great when I get to hear students walk past and say, my picture is going to be right there. Hold that spot for me. Because they are able to see how others have succeeded and they can envision themselves in that position as well. I actually have one student who has pretty much called her spot, and we're waiting for that day. Thank you. Yeah, it's really wonderful just to be able to celebrate that, because again, it's always cause for celebration. Another thing that we do for students is every time a student passes a section of their HSE, we will make a little book for them with the section that they passed in their name. And of course, as they move through more of the sections, they add to their stack of books. This is such a great opportunity to not only celebrate their success, but allow others to participate in that success as well. Some of my favorite moments in class are when a recent section passer or a recent grad come in and the classroom just erupts into applause. It's such a wonderful moment that everybody gets to share in. And then, of course, they really get to chat with one another and share how that experience went, what's going on, what their next plans are. So these are actually just, it's a kind of blown up picture of what those books look like. If anybody is interested, a coworker of mine designed those and be happy to share. It's really wonderful to get to see just how excited students are to add that up on the board. All right. How are we doing? Any questions? Anything I can help with? I see a couple are going in the Q&A. I really appreciate everybody kind of participating in the chat as well. Yeah, thank you so much. All right, so we're going to talk about community and support. So this is one of my favorite pictures. I just love the absolute joy that's happening here. It was a nice candid photo from one of our book clubs, actually. But having students come back to celebrate their success can not only inspire others, but it's also a way for other students to learn from each other. So any opportunity for students to share insight or advice on how the test went, how they're feeling, how they passed it, I want to be able to give them that opportunity. It's so helpful because those students who just went through it can give insights that may help somebody who's just about to go take the test, who's nervous to sign up for it, who may be just that little bit hesitant. They can tell other students information that we might not be able to. They might be able to say, hey, that testing center, you know, is really easy to find. It's nice and quiet. It's on the first floor. This is where you have to go. This is where you park, or this is what bus you take. This is how it smells. I once had a student share that just the testing center smelled very much so like disinfectant and cleaning products, and it was a little difficult to concentrate. And that actually helps somebody then figure out, okay, when I go there, I have to be prepared and not be thrown off by that. Those kind of little details that are just able to give other students insight. And then, of course, helping with the content of it. One of my favorite moments in class is always when I see another student helping someone else who maybe is working on a subject that they just finished, or maybe on a subject that they just passed the section for. It's so wonderful just to see how those interactions can happen and how helpful it is to hear it, that firsthand advice. That also, of course, helps build a sense of community. We want to make sure that our students feel loved and supported in their journeys. And what better way to do that than feeling it from one another? And then, of course, I always find that food and a reason to celebrate are some of the main reasons that bring people together. So it's absolutely, let's celebrate. It's wonderful to see how students come together when they want to celebrate an event or celebrate an achievement. As I mentioned in the previous slide too, relatedness is one of those most important motivators. So building that strong community in the classroom, you can do it through a variety of ways. One of the ways I found most helpful was to actually start some social academic classes. So they were supplemental outside of the classroom setting. And it really brought that sense of community. If anybody wants to talk about these more, I'd love to tell you more about my book club. But let's do it in a coaching session because I could kind of go on forever and ever. But it's great to see these kinds of moments happen then within those settings. So classroom support is so important because it not only helps with motivation, but it also helps with retention. So yes, of course, retention is one of those buzzwords that we hear again and again. We want to make sure that we help retain students. We want to make sure that despite how long it may take for their journey, that they keep going with us, right? So one of the things that I find is that when students really know that they are cared about, they are more likely to keep coming to class. It's great then when I have a student come up to me and say, hey, I haven't seen so-and-so in a minute. Can you give them a call? If they haven't called them already themselves. It's a really great way to just make sure that every student feels noticed, feels cared for, feels supported. And because retention is so crucial, the best way we can do that is to remain in constant communication with our students. If a student misses one class, I'm probably going to text them. If they miss more than 2 classes, I might give them a phone call. This is just a way to let them know that I'm worried about them. Often I'll say, hey, I missed you. What was going on? I hope everything's okay. Just letting our students know that it was noticed and they were missed. One of the best ways to say, hey, you have community here and this is where you belong. And it's so great when you start opening up all those channels of communication. Students actually start calling me now all the time to kind of say, hey, by the way, I might be a couple minutes late. I may end up, having to miss this class, but I'd be happy to, come into another class. That constant communication is so helpful. All right. How we doing? How's it going in the chat? Yeah, I see. We've got some conversations going, which is very helpful. Yeah, and I definitely want to be able to address those then in the Q&A. So please, if you have any more questions too, put that in the Q&A. All right. Now, of course, we're talking a lot about in-class support and building that community, but the other thing we want to kind of talk about is how our students need to have a strong support system outside of the classroom. Some people that they can call then when, hey, I need a ride, I gotta get to school somehow, or hey, can you babysit the kids for a little bit so that I can make it to class? We want to make sure we help our students identify who are those people that are in their corner, because we want to have that in-class support, but also our students have lives, of course, outside of our classroom, and we need to recognize that, and we need to help them figure out who can they rely on then to make sure they achieve their goals. And it's always so fun then when we host a graduation every year in June. It's a great inspiration for students to be able to attend, to be able to share, and they're also then able to bring their loved ones. It's a great opportunity for everybody to get to meet who's been supporting them through this entire journey and to get to celebrate it. Because again, celebrating that is so important. So we've been talking a lot about students reaching their goals and then actually earning their HSEs, which that is wonderful. But what happens when they don't pass that section of the test, or if they don't pass that final section and graduate? How do we have those conversations? I don't know about you guys, but those are some of the hardest, right? I really dread having them. However, I also know how vital it is to have those conversations shortly after it happens. The student doesn't pass a section of their HSE, I'm probably going to be calling them the next day. When they don't pass, I know it hurts. It hurts me too to kind of have to know that our students are going through that disappointment and that pain and that frustration. So we want to be able to give them time to feel it, right? And to grieve that moment. but then we don't want too much time to pass. I would recommend trying to get in contact with that student maybe the next day, not much longer after that, just so that we can help them make that transition from being so disappointed, but then not giving up, recognizing that, okay, now we have to figure out a next step. Oh, I'm sorry, I just looked at the chat. I love that everybody's talking about graduations. Yeah, graduation ceremonies. It's so wonderful. And I just saw having previous students come in and talk. That is a fantastic idea. Sharing those stories, yes, it's so helpful. I actually have a book recommendation as well that I'll throw in there later. So thank you all for participating so much in the chat. Anyway, I'm so excited. But as I was talking about, we need to have these difficult conversations with students when they don't pass. It's that question of, okay, what now? How do I do this? So when a student is ready to have this conversation, we want to make sure there are a few things we can do to help them. The first thing we can help students do is reframe the experience. This is so important because, of course, not passing is disappointing, and it's important to acknowledge that and to sit with that for a little bit. But then what we want to make sure we do is help students reframe that into something positive. I don't want a student to sit with that negativity and that disappointment, and I don't want them to internalize that as failure. So instead, what I want to talk to them about is how we can look at this as an opportunity to try again, to say, okay, now you've seen the test. Now you see what this looks like. Now you know how you feel going into it. Now you know how it smells, right? It's so helpful to just think about, how do I turn this into then a positive experience? And telling them, hey, you were ready to take this test yesterday. So it doesn't mean you're not ready to take this test today. It just means we need to review some things. We need to make sure we're revising that so that we can move forward and pass it that next time. So after you're able to kind of have students take a step back and look at it with a little bit less pain, a little bit less hurt, then we have an opportunity to reflect. So the next thing we want students to do is reflect on the entire experience. And this is why also talking to them shortly after the test is so important, because I want them to be able to remember some of those small details. I want them to be able to remember, what did they eat that morning? Did they get enough sleep? How did they feel as they were approaching the test center? What kind of thoughts were going through their head? Is it test taking anxiety, or was it the content of the test? What kind of questions tripped them up as they were trying to move through it? What are those areas that we can review? Looking at that score report can also be so helpful and really give students that opportunity to reflect. But again, really processing the entire experience so that then we can figure out a plan to move forward. All right. So yes, once we're able to reflect on that, that's when we want to review those goals. That's when we want to talk to students again and say, okay, let's think about what we originally set out for ourselves. Where are we now in this process? And how can we then revise? So we want to review and revise. These two pieces go hand in hand together because it gives us that opportunity to think about, okay, if I didn't get enough sleep the night before my test, maybe that means I need to take, a half day of work or something the day before to make sure that I can calm down enough that night to really get a full night's rest. Or maybe saying, oh yeah, I didn't eat anything for breakfast that day. I was so nervous and I just completely forgot. Maybe I should test a little bit later in the day so that I have an opportunity to wake up in the morning and eat something and then go. All of these things, it's so important to then revise that plan, and also to think about, again, a timeline and not that deadline. So it's not the end when we don't pass. Yeah, it can be so important to just take that opportunity to really just sit down with a student and have this conversation. It's so important. Because often, as this picture shows, I love this picture, when we come up with a plan, often we're like, yes, I created my plan, this looks good, I'm so ready to reach that finish line, reach that goal. But the reality of the situation looks so different, right? There's always some bumps in the road, there's always some unexpected things that pop up. And so we have to be able to adjust to move forward. Think about, okay, how can I approach this slightly differently? I love this little middle part where it looks like, going over it with a boat. So obviously couldn't go above, have to go through it, right? Go through that water. All right. How we doing? How's everybody doing? Excellent. Thank you for everybody in the chat. All right. And again, we can really dig into some of this even more during the coaching sessions. I want to be able to have this opportunity to speak with all of you individually as well. So actually, as I mentioned that, here are the coaching sessions. I wanted to put this here right now because if you're thinking about a particular student, or if you're thinking about a particular scenario that you want to talk through, because for instance, when I was writing that previous slide, I was thinking about a particular student. I had a student who had been studying for the social studies test for over a year. We've been working together. He attended class consistently. He's working with the same tutor. He'd been passing his practice tests. And we were so ready to go and take that official. And then, unfortunately, he didn't know he didn't pass. And so he called me. He did not have email on his phone. And so he got out of the test and he called me. And I had to be the one to tell him he missed it by 1 point. God, that 144 is sometimes the hardest number, right? So if you are thinking about a particular student that you'd like to talk about, or if you're thinking about a particular scenario that you want to talk through or get some advice on, please attend the coaching session. As I mentioned, I'm seeing a lot of great conversations happening in the chat. Let's do them in small groups. I'm so excited to be able to talk to you all about this. Okay, and then of course I have one final slide that I want to make sure we talk about, because although my students' ultimate goal may be to get their GED, that's not my ultimate goal for them. As I mentioned, I always want my students to think about why. Why are they getting that HSE? And I want to know, what can I do to help them moving forward to get to that next step? Because again, this is a series of steps. And that's something we want to stress throughout this entire journey, and we are here to help. So this is a great place then, that once a student passes their HSE, that's not end of conversation. It's not just let's celebrate, let's have the party, and let's never talk to each other again, right? I always love to hear from grads, but even more so, I want to make sure that they have that transition in place to whatever might be coming next. And of course, then when we talk about why each student wants to get their HSE, they all have different motivators, right? So if a student's main motivation is to then go on to college, I want to make sure we come up with a plan. I want to get them connected to an organization that can help them transition from an HSE learner to a college student. There are a couple of organizations in Cleveland. There's one in particular called College Now that is immensely helpful, where it can help students not only kind of figure out, how do I apply for college, how do I apply to college? Where do I look for colleges? How do I fill out the financial aid forms? It also then helps them with making that transition into becoming a college student. So there's an organization in Cleveland called College Now, so helpful, but I'd encourage you to find what are those organizations in your area that are able to do those same things for students, that are able to help them make the transition. It's also something then too that our program, we always encourage grads to come back. And as I mentioned, I love seeing my grads. I don't want to lose that communication with them. Some of them are able to keep even coming back for the book club and able to hang out with us and just come visit the classroom. I actually had a grad stop by today just to say hi. But also then, of course, we want to be able to say, hey, if you're thinking about going on to college, let me help you write maybe what an essay would look like for a college classroom. I used to teach at the community college level. I would say, I'd love to show you one of my old syllabi. I would love to help you maybe write an essay so that we could really examine it in the context of a college classroom. Here's what may be helpful when you first go to your, when you go to your first college class. Get to know the professor, ask those questions, figure out what's on campus. And then, of course, our program also offers additional tutoring. So some of our grads have come back to us with materials from their college classes, and we can say, any way we can help give you that additional tutoring, we want to do so. And then if our students' goal is not to go on to college, but perhaps to move forward in their career, to get a new job, I love having a conversation about what students are passionate about, helping them determine not just what the next job is, but what the career is, what they want to do with their lives, and really give them the opportunity to connect with services. So any way then that we can kind of help our students figure out what are they really interested in doing, how can we help them get that better job, or how can we help them maybe start their own business, whatever that they are interested in, we want to be able to help them. And so there are a lot of online resources that can really help with this. A great one is called ONET Interest Profiler, and it's a great way where it is kind of a personality quiz, but then also looking at students' interests to say, hey, this might be a really good job for you based on everything you've shared here. So if you're interested in helping people, here are some careers that may be of interest to you. And really then showing them too what level of education is needed, what some of the salaries are. It helps kind of lay out a framework for, if you're interested in this career, what can we do then moving forward? And that's what we're here to help our students do. Because again, it's not just about achieving that HSE, it's HSE and beyond. All right, well, thank you so much. I want to make sure I mention the upcoming webinars. Please, please, please join me if you're interested. I have 2 more webinars coming up. And then we have also added some other tracks. And the next webinar coming up on October 5th is for math. I would definitely recommend checking that out if you have the time. So please, here are all the upcoming webinars. Yes, thank you. Danielle is on it in the chat, putting all this in here. I so appreciate it. So yes, I would love to take some time now to talk through some questions that were put in the Q&A. So I'm here whenever you guys are ready.
So, Kara, I do just want you to reiterate one question that was talked about a little bit in the chat, but the chat was going fast and furious. So I want to make sure the people that are still here hear your take on this. And that's how to handle students who are far away from being ready to achieve their degree, but want to get it in a short time frame, like a month or 2 months.
Yeah. That is a difficult conversation, right? And it's part of that idea of the realistic and achievable for SMART goals. One thing that, especially if you have a student who's like, I need this test, like right now, I just have to take it. I think I can do it within a month. One of the things that I do find very helpful is showing students sample questions. So the GED provides some sample questions for free online. I would recommend showing those to students. I had a student one time tell me like, hey, I think I'm ready for the math test. I'm super excited. I just finished fractions. I'm ready to do that. And I showed him just the math section of the test, and he came over to me and he said, I'm not ready for it. He's like, I'm not certain what's going on. And thank you, Laura. Yes. So I do that sometimes. I'm glad you said, but wasn't sure if that's the right way to go about it, because that can be tricky. Again, working with our students, it has to be an individual approach. That's not going to work for every student. I would recommend doing it for a student who you know is perhaps maybe a little bit more like self-confident, because if it's somebody who is very, very hesitant, it might actually deter them. But if it's somebody who's like, I got this, I'm ready, let's go, and you're like, I'm not sure you're ready yet, it may kind of help counter some of that and just put things in a little bit more perspective. But you do want to be careful, because yeah, we don't want to, discourage somebody so much that then they're like, oh, I really can't do this. Now I'm on the other side of it. That's also where I would tell a student too, like, hey, that's why we take practice tests. However, I don't want you to try a practice test yet until I know like you're 100% confident. So it's really kind of a balancing act. But I would say that is one technique that I've used that can be very helpful. The other thing that I would recommend if a student is like, hey, I want this in a month, what I will do is I will just kind of show them all of the materials we have to get through. So there are often a ton of materials that we have, right, for just each subject, and kind of showing the students like, hey, we have to cover all of these topics. And reminding them that what we are trying to cram into such a short period of time is like 12 years of schooling, right? That's something that people can take years working towards. And unfortunately, we are trying to cram it within such a short period of time that we want to make sure it is achievable. It is that realistic goal. Yeah, that's a tricky one. That's one I'd love to like, if you have a specific person in mind, I'd love to chat with you about it a little bit more, because it comes down to like every individual person. Yeah, okay, thank you. I hope that helps. And yeah, guys, I can also, oops, here, I'll just stop sharing. But I can also share the sample questions that I was talking about. I'm not sure if that link went out, because it's actually through GED's website. So we can get that as well. Okay, other questions?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, we have a couple more. This one is from Kathleen. I've been using social studies for the HiSET test. Would you suggest any other materials for social studies? There is so much to learn for a student who didn't grow up in the States.
Oh my goodness. Okay. Yes, I have resources. Can I get your information to send you a list of them? Because there is so much to cover in the social studies section of both the HiSET and the GED. It's interesting how they both approach it. And for HiSET in particular, background knowledge is like so crucial. It's emphasized so much that like, yeah, for somebody who did not grow up in the United States, a lot of that information just doesn't connect automatically. So yeah, if you don't mind, whoever asked that question, I would love to have your information.
I also see in the chat a couple other people are saying they would like that too. So maybe we could put something in the follow-up, like if you wanted to put a couple of links and I can add them to the follow-up materials.
Yeah, I can do that. How about that? Perfect.
Okay.
Thank you guys, because yeah, there's tons of stuff out there and you're 100% right. Yeah, there's a lot to cover.
Okay.
Awesome.
So what is the best to do for a student who did not have access to education after grade 6? She's doing very well in English, but doesn't want anything to do with math.
So this is interesting. And again, these kind of like really specific conversations, I would just love more info. So if you can attend a coaching session, let's do that, because that would be wonderful. However, kind of a general piece of advice I would give for somebody who maybe, left school very early like that, or wasn't in a traditional classroom setting, one of the best things we can do is just help our students see education differently. See it as a more positive experience, see it as something that's focused on them as an individual learner. And also then, of course, we have to address the math anxiety. That's something that I would say perhaps with that particular student, if you work on reading first and kind of go with the comfort zone, that might be somebody I wouldn't push to kind of challenge to do math first. But then I'd also, as you're working on reading, talk to that student about how this applies to math as well, and kind of show them just how all of this is connected. I really like to talk to my students about how math is a language in and of itself, and we can read it as such. It's one of the ways that I can try to help some of our students with math anxiety. It's also something that I personally recognize in myself, and I'll tell students, I had a very difficult time with math when I was growing up. I have 2 degrees in English, and it is very purposeful. And so I have had math anxiety, and it's something that is very real, and just acknowledging that that is a difficult subject for some people can be very helpful. But yes, whoever asked that question, I want to make sure that we get an opportunity to talk more about that particular student, because I'm very curious and I'd love to help you more. Yeah, and I have some particular experiences I'd love to share with you on some students too. Yeah, definitely, Vicky. Start with those multiplication skills. Yeah. And I try to tell students too, it's interesting because all math boils down to like addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. They just ask you to do like increasingly difficult or more difficult things with it. But it's such a good way to just tell students like, let's start with this first. This is the core of math. Oh, thank you guys. I appreciate it. Yeah, so other questions? I'm sorry.
Yep, we have two more.
Okay.
That's okay. We have two more questions. This one's from Laura.
Yeah.
We have a couple different assessments that we use, but do you have any recommendations for assessments for HSE learners?
So I assume you mean like, well, do you mean like informal assessments or do you mean formal assessments, Laura, if you're still here? If you want to throw that in the chat for me. Because I would say I generally use a lot more informal assessments than formal assessments. It can be kind of difficult to find like really good ones online. I would say though that Khan Academy is a great, it's interesting because it's not an assessment, but it's an assessment. So Khan Academy, if you use it, yeah, more formal can be more intimidating. Sorry, Laura, just seeing that now. The Khan Academy has a great combination of both videos and questions. And so each one of those units are designed so that the student can kind of take a little like mini quiz at the end of it. And that's a really helpful like informal assessment. Yeah, thanks Rob for that recommendation too. Yeah, it's difficult though to find free resources for HSE too, because GED just wants us to pay for things. So I would say though, if you want to talk about more like informal assessment pieces, happy to do so. Yeah, absolutely. Oh, thanks.
Okay.
Thanks, Kip.
So Rachel asks, any immediate ideas for a student who got a 144 on social studies and a 144 on RLA?
Oh my gosh, tell that student I'm so sorry. But also, sorry. But also what I would say immediately, what you can tell that student is you are so close. That might not have even been the difference between missing one question. It might just have been a question that didn't have enough points attached to it. So that student is ready. One of the things I would recommend is figuring out then what materials cross over between the two subjects, because of course there's so much reading in the social studies, but also so many of the reading passages on the language arts section of the test are social studies materials. So a way just to find like a little bit of crossover between the two and talk about them from both just the like reading side of things, just how do we analyze this, how do we digest this, but then also talk about it from like the social studies context. So think about like, okay, what's the historical background on this? What do we need to know about this in order to answer the types of questions they'd ask if it was a language arts question or if it was a social studies question? Maybe even have them come up with their own questions. It can be so helpful, yeah, to kind of get students to think like the test maker. Also, I see that Vicky, you put in there, it's just as much about confidence. Yes, what I tell my tutors all the time is that we need to play cheerleader. It's often just about telling our students, you can do it. I had a new student today, as we were going over her TABE scores, she started to cry because she didn't think she had done that well. And the first thing I said to her was, oh my God, you did so well on this assessment. So sometimes just being that person who is going to cheerlead for them is so crucial. So especially with a 144, I always want to tell students like, oh my God, you're right there. You're so close. Yeah, and you can do it. So that would be my immediate advice. Yeah. How we
And
doing?
that's all the questions we have for today.
All the questions. Ah, you guys are wonderful. Okay. I honestly just want to spend time looking at this chat now.
Well, people will get a copy of the chat transcript in
Perfect.
addition to your follow-up sheet with all of the resources, link to the recording, and your slide deck for them to look at later this week. So they should watch their inboxes for that. There's definitely been a lot of activity in the
Yeah.
chat and a lot of great resources shared. So that's always really helpful. Thank you, everyone, for sticking around.
Yeah,
Even late.
thank
This
you.
is fantastic. Thank you for coming today. Thank you, Kara, for all this amazing information.
Thank
It's always
you.
great to have you here. And hopefully people will join you in your coaching sessions so they can dig in deeper about some of their students and the issues they face.
Yeah, I was going to say, please join a coaching session. If you're still here and you hear this message, come to a coaching session because really, like, we can dig into this so much. Like, I just want to share any help that I can give, and I want to hear what you guys are doing with your students. Because, yeah, there's so much helpful information in the chat that I didn't get to see all of it. Now I just want to know.
Absolutely. And if anyone has other questions, they can always reach out to Kara via email too.
Yeah.
Sign up for those coaching sessions, and we'll see you next time. Thank you, everyone.